My parents think using their anniversary party to force me to pay their debts was a good idea. But a judge thinks taking their house is even better. My parents recently threw a big celebration for their 30th wedding anniversary because they'd never had a big celebration in their lives. Their wedding, according to them, was a small get-together they organized. Maybe they're exaggerating. Maybe not. I thought it would be a normal celebration with lots of fun and some alcohol. Well, I was wrong about the fun part. Alcohol is a different story. My mom and dad took the opportunity to insult and scold me in front of family and friends. Perhaps because of the alcohol, they started talking, without anyone asking, about how happy they are to be blessed with 2 daughters, but how sad they are that the youngest has decided to be detached and cold toward them. They said my distance really bothered and hurt them, especially since my sister, Chelsea, has always been so close and loving to them. They said they wish their 2 daughters would love them because it hurts them that I treat them so coldly when, according to them, all they've done is love and care for me unconditionally. Listen, I was incredibly offended by that particular speech. It was long, melodramatic, and full of lies. I admit I'm very cold and detached toward them. But it's for good reason. My detachment didn't come out of nowhere. And my parents lied when they said they loved and cared for me unconditionally. If I'm honest, I can't remember a single time in my life when I felt loved by them. Loved by other family members. Of course. Loved by my parents. Absolutely not. Call me dramatic or whatever. But that's always how things have been. They love Chelsea. It's not something I lose sleep over. But the lie wasn't necessary. Besides, I thought my sister gave them the love I didn't. That's why they loved her so much and had nothing for me. Most of the time, they left me to my own devices. While my sister was spoiled beyond belief, if my sister were a balloon inflated with pampering, she would have burst by now. Or failing that, she would have floated my parents' house like in the movie. She got everything she wanted. And my parents even paid for her college twice because she dropped out the first time. They always maintained that I was a horrible daughter with an attitude, while my sister was the perfect little girl. Of course, whatever they say. Since I never made a real connection with my parents, I basically managed on my own with help from other people, whom I'm obviously not cool with. Now I have a job that my parents would consider good. Or rather, my salary it wasn't easy. And I struggled a lot. But I made it. My parents ignored me when I left home at 18 and only got back in touch when I got a job. They started complaining that they'd been struggling financially and that things at home were going badly because of all the loans they'd had to take out for us. I don't know why they said it was for us when the biggest expense was for Chelsea. Surely 80% of the debt was because of her. Anyway, Chelsea did manage to get a decent job after her second round of college, but she quickly moved on and told our parents not to ask for financial help. She was a little less direct, but the gist of what she said was this: I don't give a damn that they've invested so much money in me, but I'm not going to give them any of my salary. My parents and Chelsea actually rarely speak or even see each other regularly. So my parents are struggling and are sad that none of their daughters really care about them anymore. That was the narrative they had. Yet at the party, they pretended Chelsea was their beautiful little girl, while I was a cold, rude daughter who didn't care about her parents. For God's sake, my sister practically gave them the biggest F up of their lives. Chelsea, of course, put on the loving daughter act in front of everyone. She didn't deserve it, but I was going to make the most of it. She even got jealous when my parents tried to talk to me and get me excited about the celebration. However, in reality, she's basically abandoned our parents, since my parents didn't even mention it and made up a few lies. I decided to correct their little speech and remind them what reality is like. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was their age. But they were having some major blackouts about what it was all about. So I wanted to help them, like the good daughter I am. My response to their ramblings was that they basically shouldn't expect any returns from me when they've invested all their love, care, and attention in Chelsea. I also invested my money in a company called Banana instead of Apple and lost everything. That's why it's good to know that if you invest, you could lose everything. No, that company doesn't exist. But I wanted to set a good example. It's not my fault. Chelsea practically abandoned them. And they should be more grateful, because at least she didn't steal from them or worse. I also said it's ridiculous to expect me to have an emotional connection with them when they've always acted like a family of 3 around me. More things were said. But of course I can't include everything in this post. My mother yelled at me because she thought I was being cruel. That she was only saying it to make me realize my mistake and be more present in my life. My father was basically crying because even though he never did it, which was another lie, seeing a daughter act like that had brought him to the brink of tears. My sister approached them and began hugging and holding them so people could see what kind of humble daughter she was. Lovingly devoted to her parents. I'd already said what I had to say. I'd gone over my alcohol limit and wasn't going to drink anymore. So I left. It's been more than 24 hours. And I thought my parents would have calmed down by now. No such luck. My parents and sister are now saturating my phone, telling me that the only way I have a chance of fixing this is if I start helping them financially. At the moment, I think they're not that stupid and that they just did this as an ambush and then blackmailed me. But then I think they're even dumber. Why can't they just expect me to actually fall for that, right? My parents want me to help them financially. That's clear. But I'm also clear that my sister wants my parents to keep paying off her student loans. Because otherwise she'd have to pay them off. Like I did. My parents contributed a little, but it was really too little for the debt my sister incurred. Edit. Okay. I've been getting too many comments to follow up on, so I'm going to stop responding directly. I'm sorry to have to do this. I'm not trying to avoid your questions. I promise. I'm editing this just to include a few more details, so I don't have to go through them one by one. The most common question I get asked here is about student loans. We both took on debt to put ourselves through school. The difference in those debts is approximately 820%. My debt was lower because I chose to work while I was studying. But not only that, of that 20%. I paid off a large portion with my job. These percentages aren't exact, but I don't think they're that far from the truth. Even if it was 75 and 25, it wouldn't make it much better for my sister. Another big confusion is whether I paid for my parents' party or not. I don't know where they got the money. And to be honest, it doesn't really bother me. My mistake was attending. I won't deny that. But if I could have done things differently, I still would have attended. I think that gave me the opportunity to give my side of the story with them present. I know that if I hadn't been there, that speech might have come out of my parents' mouths. At least I had the chance to say a few things to their faces. Among those things, I asked if I was the daughter of infidelity, because I don't understand why they hate me so much. Not that I believe it, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I never considered there was something strange about them loving my sister so much. And me too. And also that for the cheap alcohol they bought, it wasn't worth it to be there. And mind you, I saw people among the guests snickering, because they must have thought the same thing. If they'd bought the good stuff, at least it would have been easier to let their nonsense slide. The headache the next day from the boxed wine was worse than all the party nonsense. I didn't expect a $300 bottle, but if you buy by the gallon, I think it was better to buy gas and serve it with an umbrella in the glass. Update 1. Before we begin, I'd like to share some information I left out because I didn't expect it to be relevant. I'm slightly on the spectrum. Yes, I probably should have mentioned it. But there's just too much stigma associated with my neurodivergence, so I don't like to tell people openly. It's not a big deal. So I thought they wouldn't notice. But someone mentioned that I might have some condition, something that would make me less visible in my parents' eyes. And everything clicked. In retrospect, I think it was the reason my parents were so hard on me and basically worshipped my sister as the perfect daughter. I admit I was a bit difficult to deal with as a child. I just wish my parents had taken me to the doctor instead of assuming I did certain things on purpose. I wasn't a tantrum-throwing kid or anything. I was just a little slow to understand certain things. I think my first post, which didn't quite see all of this clearly, is a testament to that. My parents only took me for an evaluation when I was 14. And even then, I didn't develop the comprehension skills they thought should come easily to everyone. I was evaluated, but there was no follow-up. I certainly couldn't take myself to a psychiatrist as a minor. I know this because I tried. Anyway, my parents gave up, and so did I. It became my normal, and I'd accepted it. I only snapped when they openly discredited me for being cold. Not to mention making me act that way toward them. That was very low. Anyway, I let loose and said some really mean things. I usually shut down, but not that day. For some reason, maybe an alcohol-related reason, I don't know. There's also the reality that I've been working on this with a professional for a while since I could afford it. And now I have more tools to cope. That or alcohol. Either way, I think the important thing is that I did it. Not that I was left without knowing what to do or say due to my lack of social skills. I just wanted to write this as a sort of update on my story because I realized it was necessary. Maybe now you'll understand what I've been through. Or maybe not. And be like my parents, thinking that all minds work the same. Update 2. I never thought I'd keep coming back here to vent my feelings to strangers. It's so funny how I barely talk to people in real life. But I'm really chatty here. Someone from work found my post and approached me directly, asking if it was me. I mean, the guy's parents were at the anniversary and probably told him what happened. So he realized it was me. We actually had a good laugh about this, and there was no awkward conversation. He said he's on my side and that I should give my parents what they deserve. Also, I met up with my grandparents and decided to have a little chat with them. They've been staying at my uncle's house because they'd planned to spend the winter here. It gets very cold where they live, but our city stays moderately warm. Even in winter. I will say, I'm lucky my grandparents are so available now. I don't know if I would have actually called them to tell them everything if they had been living far away. I have to thank God I didn't have to take the initiative to talk to them. They're good people and have been very loving to me. They've been more loving than either of my parents. So I went to see them and talk to them. They asked me why I had an outburst that day, why I was blaming my parents for having favorites. It's not that they didn't believe me, they just wanted me to explain what was going on. I told them everything, including many more details about all the things that had happened over the years. Things they had missed because they lived in a different city. My grandparents didn't like what they heard. In fact, they were furious when they heard it. My uncle and his wife were also present, and his wife ended up in tears when she found out what was happening. But they weren't the ones who received the biggest shock of their lives. I also received very surprising news. I was informed that my parents never shared my diagnosis with the family. Everyone had been pressuring my parents to get me evaluated since I was a child. They noticed my behavior and thought I might be on the spectrum. My parents told them I'd already been evaluated, but that I had nothing wrong with it. They said I was just a difficult child, and that I had issues with being rebellious and rude. It's confirmed that they were always ashamed that I was different. My grandparents, especially, tried to follow up with my parents, but they shut down and told them not to force a diagnosis on me. This was all new to me. The worst part was that I had an aunt who was severely autistic and died before I was born. I'd seen her pictures and knew she'd died, but I didn't know she was autistic or anything. In short, the conversation was pretty exhausting for everyone. We had a few more conversations about the topic, and they promised to confront my parents and tell them to go fuck themselves. I think there was more information needed, but I was getting too overwhelmed. So they suggested we meet another day and talk. Since my grandparents have a lot of experience dealing with someone on the spectrum, they were very careful about my needs and boundaries. I think it was the first time in my life I felt like someone in my family truly understood and cared about me. Even if they couldn't get my parents to back off, I'm glad they promised to try to help me. I may have money and everything, but sometimes it's hard to navigate life without someone to advise you. I don't mind being alone or anything, but it's nice to have people I can trust around. My grandparents will eventually leave, but my uncle and his wife will be here. At least I have that going for me. Nothing's resolved yet, of course, but I found something positive in my life. Update 3. So, after meeting with my grandparents, they decided to confront my parents the next day. My uncle went with them too. I wasn't present, but they gave me a rundown of what happened. My grandparents were extremely angry with my parents for what they did, and they said a few things to each other. My parents, in turn, defended themselves and said the problem was me, not them. There was a discussion about why my parents didn't take my diagnosis seriously, thinking it would be pointless because I would likely become mentally disabled and dependent on them in the future. They were sure I would suffer the same fate as my aunt who died, and they simply didn't want to deal with all that. Yes, they're incredibly ignorant and haven't even seemed to try to understand neurodivergence. They were afraid that if they delved deeper into my diagnosis, they'd realize I'd be completely dependent on them. Since they didn't want me to be tied to them for the rest of my life, they chose to neglect me and ignore my diagnosis in the hopes that I'd start believing I was normal. I may be on the spectrum, but even I wasn't unaware of this. They didn't want me to be dependent on them, but they made my sister very dependent on them. Not only that, but now they want to depend on me. I'm speechless about all of this. Their plan was always to kick me out and paint me as a problem child, so I'd leave them alone and keep my problems away from them. They had high expectations for their normal daughter, Chelsea. So they decided to invest in her and give her everything. Ironically, Chelsea ended up tied to them while I became independent and successful. My grandparents then asked why my coldness and detachment obviously bothered them, when that's exactly what they'd always wanted from me. Apparently, my mom and dad started saying they took care of me, that it wasn't like they abandoned me or gave me up for adoption. Suddenly, they claimed they'd made a mistake with me, and that since I was doing so well in life, it wouldn't hurt to bring me back into their family. My grandparents couldn't believe what they were hearing from them. I don't know why they told them so openly. Maybe they thought they'd understand that what they were doing was okay, that they had the right to love me less when they thought I was disabled. But when it was enough to make money, everything else would fall by the wayside. Of course, now my parents are angry with me because I told my grandparents everything. So I blocked them and my sister on my phone. Unfortunately, they're contacting me from other numbers and are basically a nuisance. They're not going to get me to respond, but I don't know when they'll stop. But I've had enough. It's ruining my life and my peace of mind. I guess I'll have to change my number or something because I'm fed up. My grandparents and uncles believe that what they've done and said warrants removing them from their lives. And as for my grandparents, they've said it's time to talk to a lawyer, so the will is updated to include my parents' or my sister's names. My sister hasn't done much lately, but through omission or whatever, she's also allowed this over the years, even on the day of the party. Update 4. Anyway, for all the well-wishers who have been genuinely concerned about me, I have good news to share. For those who think I'm a flawed person for being on the spectrum, I don't know what you're still reading this for. Some of you asked why I'm not friends with the guy whose parents were at the party. Since our parents are friends. Well, he's older than me. And I'm not very good at making friends, which I think is pretty obvious. That's why we were basically strangers until we bumped into each other at work. Don't worry. Eric and I are friends now. He told me his parents were really mad at mine when he told them, with my permission, that I'm on the spectrum. They took it to heart. They started telling everyone in their circle how horrible my parents were. So now no one wants anything to do with them. They've been facing really harsh criticism for their actions. And of course, they blame me for it. My grandparents are still angry with them and have demanded that they apologize publicly if I allow it. I won't allow it. I don't want it. But it doesn't matter because my parents refuse to admit their mistakes. Chelsea, for her part, has gotten a little out of hand with her madness. She's trying to spread fabricated stories about me online. But luckily, people are reporting her posts. And since she uses my illness to attack me, they're getting deleted pretty quickly. In fact, her account has been blocked or deleted entirely. I don't know if it's a temporary or permanent measure. I guess I was wrong about people and neurodivergence. It seems like quite a few people have become educated and aware. It's just my bad luck that in my life, I've mostly had to deal with ignorant people. It's also crazy that there are so many neurodivergent people around me and I didn't even know it. I blame the stigma because this is a small town with a lot of ignorant people. Luckily, I moved to the nearest city, where people are a little better off. Sadly, my town is only 2 hours away from my parents' town, so the bullying never really stopped. They were furious when they found out they were being isolated and criticized by their friends. Also, when they saw I had blocked them, they tried to contact me from different numbers. After a while, I was so tired of them that I started considering changing my number. It would have been a hassle because my number is important for work. I discussed this with my uncle, and he recommended that I inform my parents and sister that I would sue them for harassment if they didn't stop. I also planned to send a cease and desist letter if they didn't. However, when I warned them about pressing charges, they suddenly changed their tune the next day. They left me a message begging me to speak to them one last time. I told them no, because I didn't think they deserved any of that anyway. But my uncle has kept me up to date on what's going on with my parents. Remember the debts they ran up for my sister? Yes. They've gotten out of hand. Chelsea. Of course. You won't give them a cent. So they've been desperate to reconcile with me and ask me to pay for them. We already knew that. The only difference is that the interest on my sister's side has spiraled out of control like a mutated creature. It's more than double what they thought they had originally taken on as debt. Anyway, it seems they dug their own grave with that stupid plan. Now I refuse to speak to them, and my grandparents are going to disinherit them for their actions. My grandparents are extremely angry with my parents, but this was surprising. They later told me they were planning to leave me my parents' and my sister's shares to make up for what my parents never gave me. They thought it was unfair that I had to take out loans while my sister got 2 free degrees. As for my parents, they're in serious trouble now because no one is willing to help them. They, along with some of the commenters here, I think it's not their fault. The rest of the family, friends, and the vast majority of commenters here believe it's 110% their fault. What do I think? That it's not my debt. It's my parents' and my sister's debt. I may be on the spectrum, but I'm not stupid enough to pay for something I'm not entitled to. Update 5. I think we have a verdict on who was responsible for my parents' problems. Not that I didn't know, but it's good that a judge put it in writing. So to speak, my sister's debts. Well, they belong to my sister and my parents. Their signatures were all on the documents they signed. The only problem is that the vowed love for the golden daughter, for my sister, wanted to honor that debt. And my sister's sense of entitlement wanted her parents, the ones who spoiled her all her life, to pay for it. Well, the judge has said her creditors want the money now. This is a little more complex than simple student debt. Both my parents and my sister had mortgages on their houses, my parents to pay for some bills, and my sister, because she didn't have the money to buy a house. But amidst all the debts, someone has finally decided it's time to pay. And nothing beats a foreclosure on their property to hold them accountable. The worst part is that only covers the mortgages, but they still have a good chunk of student debt that will haunt them until the day they die. My autism will probably haunt me until the day I die, too. But I choose that over thousands of dollars I know I'll never be able to pay off. Ready for a wedding story with a twist. My daughter shut me out for being old-fashioned and let her future mother-in-law take over until everything collapsed. When she finally begged for help, I said no and didn't attend the wedding. Stay with me to hear how it all unraveled and what it taught us about respect, boundaries, and consequences. Story 2. My parents canceled my wedding to throw my brother a bigger celebration on the same day. But they forgot I owned the land. For as long as I can remember, my parents always made my brother feel like the center of the damn universe. He was the bright kid, the one with potential, the one who would one day bring him up, while I was basically the shadow walking behind him, useful only when it came to applauding his achievements or keeping my mother company when no one else would listen to her complaints. Don't get me wrong. I was never interested in competing with him or stealing anyone's attention. But as the years went by, the constant comparison, the blatant favoritism, and the way they justified absolutely everything he did while demanding twice as much from me began to wear down my patience and my way of seeing my own family. Since graduating from college without any help, by the way, I started working in landscape design and architecture. At first, it was small jobs, school parks, community gardens, and the like, until I got lucky with a client who recommended me for a complete renovation of a luxury residence. From there, everything took off. I set up on my own, opened my LLC, hired trustworthy people, and eventually managed to buy a piece of land on the outskirts of the county, near the woods, with a spectacular view and no nearby neighbors. It was a large space, with a pasture in the background, trees around it, and a kind of natural clearing I'd always dreamed of using for something special. I'm not religious or particularly romantic, but from the first time I walked through it, I knew I wanted to get married there someday. I'd worked that land with my own hands, clearing the area, leveling areas, planting trees that would form a natural walkway. For me, it wasn't just a piece of land. It was a symbol of what I had built on my own. When I met Ryan, it all started simply. He wasn't perfect, nor did he pretend to be. And that's what I loved about it. We met at a meeting with mutual clients. He was part of the sonification legal team, and I was an external designer. After several coffees, several projects, and several times we ended up staying up late, talking more about life than work, we started dating. It was a slow, mature, calm relationship. When he proposed to me, he didn't do it with a show. No cameras. No ridiculously expensive ring. He just made me pasta with pesto, lit candles on the balcony, and told me he wanted his life to blend with mine as much as possible. I said yes, without thinking twice. I loved him, and I was ready. Since we didn't want a lavish wedding with 200 guests, we decided to keep it intimate. Just close family and real friends. No social engagements or appearances. We were going to have it on my land with a rustic setting, wildflowers, string lights, and a wooden altar he started carving himself. I was in charge of all the design. I had a stone platform built for the ceremony. We rented a small tent in case it rained and hired an acoustic folk band for the reception. It all felt like a dream come true. Until my parents suddenly decided to blow it all up. 2 months before the wedding, just when we had a confirmed date, decorations paid for, and contracts signed with the vendors. My mother called to tell me that my brother had decided to get engaged too. That didn't bother me. I was bothered by the tone in which he said it, as if his were a higher class event. The worst came later, when, without the slightest restraint, he told me that since the family couldn't afford 2 celebrations so close together, they decided it would be best to cancel my wedding because my brother's event was going to be bigger, with more guests, and more representative of the family. When I asked him if he was kidding, he told me they'd already talked to everyone, that the guests would understand, and that I'd have another time to celebrate something simpler if I wanted. My dad only reinforced the same thing, saying that you have to prioritize the important things, that his son was marrying a girl from a prominent family, and that mine was more like a picnic. I felt a mixture of anger, disbelief, and disgust, not only because they had the nerve to make my wedding look like an irrelevant picnic, but because everything was already underway. When I reminded them that the property was mine, my mother laughed and said something like, "No problem. We'll hold your brother's event right there, since you were going to use it anyway, so we don't lose the investment." They didn't even ask, didn't even pretend to give me a choice. It was as if I didn't count, as if I were just a logistical inconvenience. For them, it was as easy as crossing me off the calendar and replacing me with their favorite child. At that moment, I didn't say anything. I hung up the call, turned off my cell phone, canceled a meeting I had with a supplier, poured myself a drink, and walked to the edge of the land I'd cared for so much. I sat there staring at the trees I planted 3 years earlier and swore that if they wanted to play dirty, I was going to muddy them up to the gills. I wasn't going to stand by while they used my property, ignored my relationship, and turned my work into a stage for a celebration where they would exclude me like a stranger. They had forgotten one detail. That land was legally mine, and I could do whatever I wanted with it. Update 1. Exactly 3 weeks passed after that call before my parents contacted me again, this time via a group message they created with my brother, his fiancée, and several extended family members. In the message, my mother basically announced that the Gonzalez family and the McAllen family would be joining forces for an unforgettable event, filled with love and tradition. On October 14th, she attached a horrible, cheesy, text-saturated image, stating that the ceremony would be held on our beloved groom sister's beautiful estate as a symbol of unity and generosity. I read that, and my stomach burned. Not only had they erased me from the calendar, as if my wedding plan had never existed, but now they were turning me into a sort of involuntary sponsor of theirs. As if my silence were a kind of passive consent. Even worse, the message was public, visible to the entire family, many of whom began to respond with blessings, emoticons and phrases like, "I'm so glad it's going to be done in such a special place," or, "Your sister has always been so noble." My ovaries are noble. Ryan was the one who grabbed my hand when he saw me shaking with anger, reading that and asked me if I'd already thought about what we were going to do. I told him yes, that not only had I thought about it, but I'd already started the paperwork. The next morning, I went straight to the county office with all the paperwork for the land, which, thankfully, I had registered solely in my name and without any joint ownership or trusteeship. I requested that the land's land classification be updated to private recreational use with access restrictions, which was perfectly legal because, with no public roads or shared rights of way, I could restrict access to whomever I wanted. I paid the priority fee so the process wouldn't take weeks and submitted the application with all the documents in order. I wasn't going to let them just sit there like they owned it. On top of that, I began contacting all the vendors I had originally hired for my wedding one by one. I told them the situation directly, without any frills, and most were as outraged as I was. Some canceled the arrangements my parents had tried to negotiate after suggesting a change of venue, and others offered full support for any adjustments I needed. One of the florists even told me she thought it was completely disrespectful, and that if I wanted, she could help me rearrange everything for a different type of ceremony. I thanked him, but didn't tell him that my plans were no longer to celebrate anything. I was no longer in girlfriend mode. Now, I was in Avenger mode. A few days later, my brother texted me. He hadn't done so in months. He hadn't even congratulated me when I announced I was getting married. The cynical man began the message by saying that he hoped I wasn't upset, that he understood there was an awkward overlap in dates, but that at the end of the day, the family had to do what was best for everyone. Then he said that he hoped he could count on my understanding and collaboration to make the event a success, and that it would be lovely to see everyone celebrating together. What blew my mind was that he ended by saying it would be the perfect touch if you could lend us your space. It would be like a symbolic blessing from you for my new stage of life. I almost threw my phone out the window. "I'd like to lend it to you," she said, as if I were the godmother of charity, as if I hadn't been asked first. Instead of responding, I forwarded a PDF with the new land use restrictions and a brief note stating that for personal reasons, no event of any kind would be authorized that day or any other, without a written and signed request at least 60 days in advance. No further writing was necessary. I know he read it because he left me on read without answering, and then it was my mother who called me furiously, screaming into the phone like a hysterical woman, saying what the hell did I think I was doing? That I couldn't change the rules of everything just because I was obsessed with ruining their important day. I simply responded that I wasn't changing anything. I was just using my property as the legal owner, and that they could look for any other location among the thousands in the state. Then he said, what broke my last shred of patience, "Do you think anyone's going to come to your wedding after what you're doing? You're going to be alone. And all because of your ego." That phrase gnawed at my mind for days. Not because it hurt, but because it made it clear to me that there was no turning back. That woman didn't want me to be happy. She didn't care about my relationship, my job, my plans, or my efforts. She just wanted a facade for her golden boy. So I decided that not only was I not going to allow them to use my space, but I was going to make every minute they spent trying to organize their wedding without me a slow, uncomfortable, and expensive torture. I owed it to myself, to everything I'd endured for years. And if they thought that was a whim, then they were about to learn what it's like to see a wayward daughter become her own damned karma. Update 2. A month later, the family atmosphere was pure poison. Neither my mother nor my brother wrote to me directly again. But their anger seeped through everywhere. My aunt started sending me passive-aggressive texts, saying things like hoping I'd reconsider before the big day, or that we shouldn't hold grudges, especially between siblings. My cousin Lisa even texted to tell me she was on my side, but to please not ruin everything because she'd already bought a dress, a plane ticket, and booked an Airbnb with 3 other friends who were also invited. When I replied that the land wasn't going to be used and that they should notify everyone as soon as possible, he left me dumbfounded. Just like that. Apparently, it was easier to treat me like a bitter, vindictive woman than to accept that my family was acting like a bunch of selfish children. I stood my ground without responding further. But I didn't just sit back. That family knew me as the one who endured, the one who kept quiet, the one who backed away so as not to cause trouble. But now they were going to meet the side of me they never wanted to see. I did 2 important things during those weeks. First, I hired an electrical installation company to build a perimeter fence with an automated access system and surveillance cameras. When the technician asked me if I wanted it to be visible or discreet, I told him I wanted it with big signs: private property, no entry, active surveillance, even prosecution, no subtlety, no room for excuses. We installed motion sensors at the side entrances and a direct notification system for my phone and Ryan's. At the same time, I sent a notarized letter to my parents, explaining that the land was legally restricted and that any unauthorized access would be treated as a violation of private property. I enclosed copies of the new zoning, the fence permit, and the state trespass statutes. I left no loopholes. I made sure everything was documented down to the last detail. I knew what they were like. I knew they would try to ignore it or make fun of it. But this time, if they did, I wouldn't be the one who ended up apologizing. The second thing I did was even dirtier, but totally necessary. I contacted one of the caterers my mother had hired for my brother's wedding. It was a family-run company I knew because I worked with them on a wedding 2 years ago. I was straightforward. I told them the contracts they'd been asked to sign were invalid because the venue didn't have a use permit and the land was under legal dispute. Technically, it wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't a lie either. If they entered without the owner's express authorization, they could get into trouble. I showed them the documentation, and as expected, they canceled the date. They told me they'd received a request without a full deposit, and that, after reviewing the situation, they preferred not to get involved. That started a domino effect. The chair and tent rental company also pulled out because they have a clause requiring confirmation from the landowner before setting up any structure. In a matter of 5 days, my parents were left without catering, without furniture, and without legal security for their big event. I found out about all this, not because they told me directly, but because my Aunt Letty called me screaming on the phone at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. His voice trembled with anger as he told me I was ruining the family's dream and that my behavior was an unforgivable betrayal. With a calmness I didn't even know I possessed, I replied that the only unforgivable thing was turning my back on my engagement just because the perfect son wanted to get married on the same day. I told her that no one forced them to choose that date, that they could have done it any other weekend of the year. But no, they chose my day, my place, my job, as if it all belonged to them. Then Letty let loose, with a little gem that still makes me squirm. He said if you're not willing to share, then don't complain when no one includes you afterward. I laughed, not mockingly, but with weariness. I told him not to worry, that I'd never again be counted on to attend his hypocritical get-togethers. Ryan, for his part, was supportive throughout. He told me he was proud of me, that he wasn't being cruel, just fair. And even though we weren't talking about our wedding anymore, I could tell from the way he looked at me that he still wanted to be with me. Only he understood that now my priority was to set definitive boundaries with those who had trampled on me my entire life. I started sleeping better at night, working with more concentration, and even going for a run in the mornings again. I felt strong, in control of myself, my space, my decision. I didn't care if they ended up having their wedding in a rented hall or in a cousin's backyard. All I wanted was for them to never forget that they tried to screw me over and it backfired. And it wasn't over yet. The final blow was still to come. The one that would truly hurt. The one that would make their faces burn with shame every time they thought about that October. Update 3. As soon as we crossed into September, things started to get more desperate on my parents' side through acquaintances and gossip that reached me, even through clients. Because, of course, these kinds of families don't know how to keep their dirty laundry under wraps. I gradually learned about the chaos they were experiencing while trying to restructure my brother's wedding. The most ironic thing was that they were still obsessed with celebrating that same damn October 14th. Instead of changing the date or accepting that they needed another venue, they insisted on making everything revolve around that date, as if it had been written in stone by divine mandate. According to what they told me, they had tried to reserve a property near my land, but it was already occupied by a spiritual retreat that weekend. They then considered holding the event in the church where my grandparents were married, but the attached hall was being renovated, and the priest wouldn't let them use the grounds because they didn't have portable toilets or maintenance staff. Every time they tried to close a deal, something fell through. The universe seemed to mock them with the same elegance with which they scorned me weeks ago. I simply watched, without lifting a finger, without responding to the few indirect attempts my mother made to get us together to talk maturely, as she wrote in an email that I immediately sent to the trash without reading it in full. At the same time, I continued to refine my own revenge, because for me, it was no longer enough to have blocked access to the land or sabotaged its suppliers. That was just the beginning. I wanted something to hurt their egos, something to take the wind out of their sails, something they'd remember every damn anniversary. So, without telling anyone, I booked a private ceremony with the judge who was originally going to marry Rayan and me. We didn't do anything fancy, no flowers, no all guests, no dessert tables, just the two of us. The judge, 2 witnesses we hired online, a lovely pair of grandparents who did this as a hobby in their retirement, and a bottle of wine we opened in the back of my truck after signing the wedding certificate. We got married on the 14th Fiver, September, exactly 1 month before my brother's big day. We did it in a different area of the property, away from the central clearing, without a stage or lights. It was intimate, ours, and free of the family poison. Rayan cried. I smiled like a satisfied daughter. Because at that moment, I was not only marrying the man who chose me unconditionally, I was also sealing the beginning of a new stage where no one else would have the power to dictate what day I should celebrate, with whom, or under what conditions. But that wasn't the most juicy. The tastiest part came next. A week before October 14th, I learned that they had finally managed to rent a hall at the county community center, one of those soulless rectangular spaces, with waxed comfort and fluorescent lights. According to an old friend who worked in the local government, they had gotten the space at the last minute because another couple canceled due to a medical emergency. They had to manage to decorate the place in less than 5 days. Since the usage was limited to exactly 12 hours due to center policy, my mother, in a Vesperity act, asked several friends to donate decorations, recycled flowers from other events, and even homemade dishes to put together something that didn't look like a 90 seconds bachelorette party. There was no fancy tent, no ceremony among trees, no rustic altar or hanging lights. I just crumpled fabric, curtains, folding chairs, and a DJ placed against a wall because there wasn't a budget for a band. I learned all this because, in a move that still makes me laugh when I remember it, I joined the closed Facebook group for the neighborhood where the community center is located. I created a fake account, joined the group, claiming to be a new neighbor, and started asking questions about the location, times, and activities. No one was suspicious. One woman even posted photos of the venue, which had been decorated with great care by the groom's parents, with a comment saying she hoped it wasn't obvious it was all done at the last minute. Because the family was obviously stressed, I responded with a troll account saying I hoped at least their wedding would last longer than the decorations. The level of PTI I managed that week was award-winning, and if that weren't enough, their wedding day, that glorious October 14th, they had so fiercely defended, dawned with a thunderstorm that lasted well into the night. The community center, being an older facility, suffered intermittent power outages. As far as I've heard, the ceremony had to be delayed. Some dishes arrived cold, and the lights failed just as they were about to dance. At 10 p.m., someone uploaded a video to the group showing the bride and groom dancing in the dark with cell phone flashlights while the guests applauded uncomfortably. I watched it from my living room, holding a glass of wine and my husband around my waist. I didn't say anything. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything on my social media. I didn't have to make a fuss. They just ruined their own story by trying to steal mine. And although no one has said it out loud, I know that every time they look at the photos from that night, they'll think about what could have been if they hadn't played with me. Because that piece of land they scorned was more than grass and trees. It was mine. And now it was also the symbol of their own downfall. Update 4. About 3 months passed after that lackluster wedding before my mother tried to reach me again. This time with a much more tired, much more fragile voice. As if she had aged a decade in that short span. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon, as I was leaving the nursery with some new plants for the greenhouse. I answered because I wanted to hear what new excuse she came up with. And I wasn't wrong. She began speaking to me in a feignedly sweet tone, asking how the marriage was going, if Diane was still working at the same firm, and if we thought about having a small celebration, even a family one, so everyone could be present. I didn't respond at first, I just let her talk, to see how far her manipulation would go. It took her less than 5 minutes to spill the beans on what she was really interested in, that the McCallan family, my brother's wife's family, was upset about how everything had turned out, and that this had caused tension between the two families. According to her, some malicious people had told them the wedding was sabotaged, and that it wasn't a coincidence that everything went so wrong. When he mentioned that, I almost burst out laughing. Malicious? No. What happened is that finally, someone in that circle of stuck-up people connected the dots and understood that it wasn't just bad luck, but the result of trying to take advantage of someone who had already grown tired of eating the crumbs. My mother, in her desperation, asked me to make a gesture of reconciliation with the family, to organize a small luncheon, to show that I didn't hold a grudge, that I was over it. I asked her why I should do anything if she was the one who'd erased me, as if my wedding didn't matter. If she was the one who prioritized a party for my brother. If she was the one who justified everything, as if I were a child who needed to understand her place. She replied that she didn't want things to continue to fester, and that if we didn't take steps to heal, we would end up completely estranged. I told her that had already happened, but she hadn't wanted to accept it yet. That I wasn't estranged. I was completely out. I made it clear to her that I wasn't going to lend myself to cleaning up anyone's image, and that if she wanted to make amends, she could start by publicly apologizing with the same energy with which she had announced the cancellation of my wedding in that damned family group. She hung up crying, and it didn't move a cell in my body. The most pathetic thing was that the following month my brother wrote to me, this time not with sarcasm or superiority, but with a desperate tone. It turns out that the in-laws were pushing because the marriage had started off on the wrong foot, and they were hinting that they were going to back out of certain financial agreements they'd made with my dad. Some involving a joint real estate investment. Apparently, part of that informal agreement included the wedding being a prestigious event with magazine-worthy photos and a high-profile guest list that never arrived. The McCallan are the kind of people who believe that everything is bought with image, and when that image is tarnished by a wedding in a dimly lit community center, everything falls apart. My brother wrote to me saying they needed to clear some things up because the rumors were affecting their relationship with their in-laws. She asked me to please speak to someone if they asked, to say it was all due to bad weather or a misunderstanding about the land permits, but to please not make things worse. She asked me with the tone of someone who had never learned to own up to her mistakes, only to clean up other people's messes, I replied bluntly that every word I said or didn't say now was mine, and that it had been generous of her not to tell everyone from the start. That if they wanted to save face, the least they could do was stop bothering me. That I wasn't going to bear the consequences of decisions they made without telling me, without respecting me, or even asking my permission. And that if anyone else tried to drag me into their mess, then I would make sure the truth came out. Complete with screenshots, emails, call recordings, and everything I'd put up with since day one. I haven't heard anything since. There have been no meetings, no calls, no invitations disguised as reconciliation. They've deleted me. Yes. But I don't care anymore because this time they didn't delete me as punishment. But as a consequence, because it's not just about the terrain, or the wedding, or a particular day. It's about showing them that they could no longer use me as a doormat, that the silent daughter who stayed on the sidelines was no longer there, that I am now the woman who taught them that patience has its limits and that revenge, when served cold, can leave scars that not even time can erase. Final update. More than a year passed since that circus disguised as a wedding and the total breakup with my parents, before anything else stirred up all the dust they thought had already settled. By then, Ryan and I had already established our business. We had completely remodeled part of the property into a multi-purpose commercial space, nothing big, but professional, and we started renting it out for low-key corporate events and photo shoots. Creative retreats and other projects that provided us with a steady income without exposing the site to just anyone. The irony wasn't lost on me. This land my family had despised. The one my mother dismissed as a simple rural plot and which my brother assumed he could use for free to show off to his new in-laws. Now it was a profitable, well-maintained space, sought after and valued by people who didn't even know the story behind it. It was essentially a living example of what I had built with my own hands, while they were too busy smacking their egos. What really made me close this chapter with a sweet and cruel taste in my mouth was learning from a former college classmate who worked at a financial consulting firm that my father and brother had been excluded from a fairly important investment project, precisely because someone on the committee knew about their informal handling of family agreements. Apparently, an investor who had attended that infamous wedding as a guest later learned through veiled rumors that the event had been the result of a blatant family robbery. He decided not only to withdraw from any involvement with them, but also to share his experience with other business contacts. It wasn't a public cancellation or a viral scandal, but something more subtle and lethal, a silent mistrust in an environment where reputation is everything. The consequences weren't immediate, but they were inevitable. 2 businesses they had underway with external partners collapsed due to lack of financing. One of the projects, an urban redevelopment project near the local university, was acquired by another firm. My father, who always considered himself a business visionary, began to talk about betrayals and envy, unaware that the problem was him, my brother, as I learned from others, also began to have problems with his in-laws. The image of Golden Boy they tried to sell crumbled when the reality of their decisions came to light, and when it became clear that he had neither the control over his own wedding nor the ability to manage conflicts without damaging alliances, the trust was shattered. I was told that his in-laws began pressuring him to step back from certain roles in the family business, and that there were even rumors that his wife no longer accompanied him to public events. I didn't confirm it, but I didn't have a hard time believing it. Those kinds of people don't forgive humiliation, especially when it comes disguised as rain and cell phone flashlights in the middle of a wedding that was supposed to be epic. What was absolutely true was that months later, he tried to publicly sell his version of the story in an informal interview for a local podcast about entrepreneurship. I listened to the whole thing. He tried to minimize everything by saying there were differences with one part of the family, that sometimes things don't go the way you want, and that family ties always have ups and downs. But he didn't mention my name once. Not once. He didn't dare. I didn't need it. By then, I'd already found something infinitely more valuable than his recognition, peace. The real one, the one you don't feel when everything is calm, but the one that prevails when nothing, and no one has the power to screw you over anymore. The one that comes when you look back and feel no guilt, no regret, no desire to explain anything to anyone, only satisfaction. Because I didn't take revenge with screaming or violence. I didn't make a fuss or pursue wanton destruction. I just took away their privilege of counting on me. I took away their access. I took away their ground, their control, their narrative. And in that void left by my limits, they themselves sank. They were wrong to think my silence was weakness. They didn't understand that sometimes silence is simply a sign that you're planning something much more effective. I never saw them again. Not in person. At least once. While we were having lunch on a terrace with Ryan, I saw my mother walk by on the opposite sidewalk. She saw us. She saw me. She stopped for a second. Just long enough for our eyes to meet. She didn't make a move to approach me. She didn't greet me. He lowered his gaze and continued walking. And in that instant, I knew he understood. That he finally understood there was no turning back. Because it's not just about losing a daughter, it's about losing the right to be a part of her life after betraying her. That was my revenge. Silent, calculated, and devastating. It didn't require scandal. Just time, memory, and the land they should never have tried to steal from me.